We're going to do some converting here between decimals and fractions and converting those to percents. So first, let's remember that percent means out of 100. So if I have 7 out of 100, there's a fraction, this is the same as 7%. So if you have a fraction that gives it to you out of 100, that's great. That's an easy conversion from percent to 100, from a fraction to a percent, because the numerator is simply the percent. But how often do we really get a fraction over 100? Well, not very often. So let's just think this through. So if I have, let's just stick with 7 over 100. As a decimal, that's 0.07. And as a percent, that's 7%, as I just mentioned. Okay, great. This is all fun. What if I have 43 over 100? Well, again, we can say, well, if we divide that, 43, remember, a fraction bar is the same as a division sign. This is the same as 43 divided by 100, which turns out to be 0.43. And as we know, it's 43% because anything over 100, that's the percent. So let's look at the connection here between the decimal and the percent. You'll notice if I take my decimal point and I move it to the right 2 places, I get the percent. This is the same as multiplying by 100. If I take 0.07 and I multiply it by 100, I get 7. So we would say that if we take a decimal and we multiply by 100 or move the decimal 2 places to the right, it turns it into a percent. And that is our process of changing a decimal to a percent. We will move the decimal point 2 places to the right. Mathematically, we are multiplying by 100. If we have a fraction, and the fraction is not divided by 100, because it rarely is, we will first change that fraction to a decimal by division, right? Numerator divided by the denominator. Then, once we have it in decimal form, then we can move the decimal point, same concept, multiplying by 100. Let's do this. So first, let's convert each decimal to a percent. So remember, the idea of this is percent means out of 100. So the idea of multiplying by 100 is moving the decimal. So this gives me 2%. And, you might say, well, these are all very easy. And I understand that. And that's super fabulous. But it's very important that we understand the concepts. Now, you'll notice these first two are both less than 1. Right? 0.75 is 75%. When we think of the idea of 100%, this is all, right? 100% is the entire piece. So 1, right? And 100% is 1. Well, if you look at letter C, we have 1.38. That's greater than 1. That's greater than a whole thing. So our percentage, if we move it 2 places or multiply by 100, we end up with 138%. Right? It's greater than 1, so it's going to be greater than 100%. In letter D, you'll notice we only have 1 place past the decimal point. Well, that's fine. Anything past that, they're just zeros. We could put as many as we wanted to put there. But when we multiply by 100, or we move it 2 places, we really only need 1. And that gives us 40%. Up to this point, we've had whole numbered percents. But when we get to letter E, if I multiply by 100, move my decimal 2 places, you'll notice my decimal ends up here between the 3 and the 9. So I have 73.9%. Okay, great. Now let's go ahead and move on to some fractions. When you get to the fractions, remember your first step is to divide. So in letter A, I'm first going to take 2 divided by 5, which gives me 0.4. And as we just saw on that last spot, if I have 0.4 and I move it 2 places or multiply by 100, I get 40%. In letter B, you'll notice the numerator is bigger than the denominator. That means I'm going to have a number bigger than 1 because 8 over 8 is 1. Anything bigger then 8 in the numerator is going to give me a decimal larger than 1. So now when I multiply by 100 or move the decimal, I have 162.5%. In letter C, I have a mixed number. So our first step is to change this mixed number to an improper fraction. So remember, we take our whole number and we multiply by the denominator. So 1 times 4, and then we add the numerator. So 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So 1 1/4 as a improper fraction is 5/4. Now I can take 5 divided by 4 and get 1.25. Then I can move my decimal and I'm left with 125%. And the last one, when you divide 7 divided by 9, you get 0.77777. The sevens just keep repeating. So you're going to have to make a decision to round. It's important to always read directions. Now, in our case, we're not given any directions of what to round to. So we're going to go to the nearest hundredths of a percent. Hundredths of a percent. So first, I will change it to a percent by multiplying by 100. Moving the decimal 2 places. So now I have 77.77777, and it goes on forever, percent. Nearest hundredths, 2 places past the decimal. So I look at this number. 7 tells me to round up. So I have 77.78% rounded to the nearest hundredths of a percent.